Tonight's discussion is on um, heroes in today's culture, and we're specifically talking about recent weeks and the protests and riots, and we're not limiting it to heroes. I wanted to have a title that's a bit more optimistic and a bit shorter, but I think and Andy, you and I have spoken about this. That there are more villains than heroes, unfortunately, in recent weeks that we can see. And but before we start, Andy, you also have a show that's going to be launching, debuting in 2 days, right? So, do you want to tell us about that show, and then we can start?
Yeah, it's under the auspices of the Objective Standard Institute, OSI, and John Hersey, who's one of the head editors or chief editors at the Objective Standard. John and I are launching a show on Friday called the Hero Show. It's at 10 a.m. Eastern time, in the United States. So what is that? Is that three?
That's 3 p.m. Yeah.
In the UK, on OSI's YouTube channel. But every Friday morning, we're gonna be focused on heroes. I'm going to start with Frederick Douglass, who was a great abolitionist and escaped from slavery and became a brilliant writer and speaker. His essay on the self-made man is outstanding. I recommend everyone to read it or reread it. But in the midst of all these race riots and everything, it's great to see a black American guy who was a real hero, real intellectual. But every week we're going to be focused on heroes, on their life-giving achievements, on how we benefited from the great accomplishments of these heroes, and of course the inspirational value they have, they bring into our life. And of course, here's a copy of my book, Heroes, Legends, Champions: Why Heroism Matters, available on Amazon. So we'll be discussing a lot of the heroes in the book. But yeah, every week we're going to be focused on heroes. It's going to be a very positive, very inspirational, very uplifting show. So thank you for mentioning it, Rossi.
Yeah, and I know everybody when they look at history has heroes that they think of and admire. And unfortunately, when we look at very recent history, that becomes a bit more difficult. So I'm going to pass it on to you and see if you have identified any heroes in recent weeks, and if not, we can also talk about the less nice aspect of what we've seen.
The bad guys, right? But yeah, I do have a few heroes just in recent weeks, and I want to start out by saying, the world is not limited to viruses and race riots, right? I mean, there's other things going on in the meantime, and hopefully it didn't get buried in the news cycle and all of the bad stuff in recent weeks. But SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, launched the first privately run, aerospace company, launched 2 astronauts into space, into the International Space Station from Cape Canaveral in Florida. And so this could be, we could be at the beginning of an era. I hope so. It's very possible. This could be epoch making, privatization of space exploration. And Elon Musk, who overall, I think he's a mixed case. Overall, I regard him as a hero. I think the good outweighs the bad. I think in the technical terms of economics, he's a rent seeker. That he's constantly looking for taxpayer money from the government. But at the same time, he is a visionary entrepreneur, and I think SpaceX, is a brilliant company, and one of its ultimate goals is to colonize Mars. I mean, you talk about visionary and daring. I mean that is outstanding. And Elon Musk was an immigrant. I assume everybody knows who he is. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, made a fortune as one of the creators of PayPal. One of his companies is Tesla. I think he's from South Africa, I believe. South African immigrant to the U.S. But SpaceX is my favorite Elon Musk company, with the goal to colonize Mars, have human beings living on Mars. And he's not shy. I mean, he's not bashful. He said in so many words that human race, we're going to be an interplanetary species. So I mean, and I, and when it was in 30 years, he expects to have human beings on Mars. So I mean, that is, and this is a first step to be able to launch. Oh, and by the way, we should point out that SpaceX has become the first agency to be able to reuse their rockets. They land their rockets on ocean-built platforms, and then they can reuse them, which is enormously cuts expenses of space travel. So that is truly outstanding. Reminds me the words of the great astronomer Carl Sagan. If you might remember Carl Sagan from the Cosmos TV series, which was the most widely watched science series ever. Sagan was a brilliant astronomer at Cornell. Unfortunately, he died young of cancer. But Sagan said, in the early 20th century, when human beings could see the canals on Mars, they thought there was intelligent life on Mars. And that was a big issue 100 years ago. But Carl Sagan said, decades later about that dispute, he said the Martians will be us. And there's no intelligent life on Mars now, but the Martians will be us. Hopefully, when we get there will be intelligent life on Mars then, right? Because sometimes human beings do not act so intelligently. But this is an enormously heroic undertaking. The possibilities, for colonization, because there's no intelligent life there, so there's no negotiations that has to take place with other living beings, and eventually the enormous potential for scientific research and what we can learn about different aspects of the solar system and ultimately the universe, colonization, the expansion of the human race to other parts of the solar system, and eventually to the stars. And although right now it'd be prohibitively expensive to mine these other planets for resources and ship them back to Earth, the transportation costs would be just exorbitant. But in time, that might well be feasible also. So I think this is an enormously heroic undertaking, and I applaud Elon Musk, his company, and the NASA astronauts for this. One other, going back to the virus, one other person who's semi-heroic here, and I hate to talk about politicians as heroes because I don't generally think of them as heroes, but the governor of the state of South Dakota, her name is Kristi Noem, and she has she was one of the governors in the United States who did not impose lockdowns on the state. She did not shut down the economy. She urged South Dakota citizens to use their judgment wisely regarding masks and social distancing and stuff. But she didn't lock down the state, didn't destroy the economy. I mean, she said in so many words, as a quote from Governor Noem, she said, quote, "More freedom, not more government is the answer," unquote. It's another quote from her. "If you want freedom, personal responsibility, and a government that works for you rather than dictates to you, South Dakota is that place." Now, South Dakota is not exactly the garden spot of the United States. It's off the beaten path. I can tell you that because I went to college there. I went to college in Mount Marty College, a small Catholic school in Yankton, South Dakota. And it's the kind of place that lends itself to no lockdowns because the population is sparse. So geographically, it's a huge state. I just Googled the population. I got two different answers. So one was 884,000, and the other was 858,000. So if we split the difference, the population's roughly 870,000, and out of that population so far, there have been 5,471 reported cases of the virus with 65 deaths. As Kristi Noem argues, freedom works. As Ayn Rand taught us, the moral is the practical. You respect individual rights. There are salutary results. And I'm hoping that she is first of all, hope that she keeps to her principles of more freedom, not more government is the answer. And secondly, that she becomes a rising star in the Republican Party, and maybe in 4 years, she or Nikki Haley. How about an all-female Republican ticket? Christy Noem and Nikki Haley, or Nikki Haley and Christy Noem. There's a ticket that I would vote. I don't care what gender they are. So what I care about is their principles, and and they are freedom supporters, at least now. Hopefully they stick to their guns, and one or either of them are on the Republican ticket in 4 years. So there's Elon Musk, Christy Noem, I think, are two people in the last few weeks who I think have shined and I think deserve recommendation and merit as heroes. So that's, that was that. Glad you're back, Razi. Timing is good. That concludes my opening remarks.
Well, I missed some of that, so I'm guessing you didn't touch on the villains yet. And I would strongly encourage anybody who has anything to say that's positive to raise their hand or type it in the chat, because if we go to me, we're gonna start talking about some of the villains.
Yeah, well, it's understandable. The evil in the world, which just changes its forms. I mean, imagine if we were living in the 1930s, when Hitler was in power and the National Socialists were in power in Germany, Stalin and the Communists were in power in the Soviet Union, and so on and so on. I mean, that was a horrendous evil that could defeat the West militarily and end freedom. We're not in that situation today, but there are plenty of villains, and they have power, and they're burning down the United States. I don't know what's going on in the UK, but they're burning down some of the cities. That's hyperbole. Rioting and looting and burning buildings and stuff. There's plenty of villains, but we need to talk about it. It's important, and it gives us a chance to vent. But it's always nice to look at the good guys too. Well, you want to start venting about the bad guys, Rob?
I have this email from Time Out magazine open. This is before I unsubscribe to it. I don't want to read from it. I want somebody to say something positive, so I'm going to wait. But if it doesn't come, we're going to Time Out and Uber Eats and all these wonderful businesses who are fighting.
This is the stuff I avoid because it just enrages me, and then it's very difficult for me to write. So I just mute yourself. I don't even want to hear this stuff.
Joseph is going to bail us out for the time being.
Yes. So I was thinking, are there some heroes of the past that were supporters of reason? Could you mention some of them? How far back do we have to go, etc.?
Heroes of the past that were supporters of what?
Of reason.
Oh, of reason. Oh, there's plenty of them. But I thought the guidelines here were in the last few weeks.
Okay. All right. I apologize for that.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of supporters of reason and freedom in history. Otherwise, I don't know what state the human race would be in today if there'd be any free countries or relatively free countries at all.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the attempt, Joseph.
It was a thin bailout.
All right, so this is the email from Time Out. Say it loud, Black Lives Matter. Protests across London have demonstrated how serious its citizens feel about implementing systemic change following the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minnesotan police. Can't protest but still want to show your support? We urge you to donate to these fantastic London anti-racism charities and use our frequently updated list of directories connecting you to the city's Black-owned businesses. Now, there's nothing I like in what I just read, but there is something that specifically just horrifies me, and that's the last part. And they're not the only ones who have done this. I have the screenshot from Uber Eats at some point. If somebody wants me to read it, I'll read it. But this thing. Oh, Antoine can't raise his hand, but yeah, I'm already in the rant. But I will. You can unmute yourself, by the way, because you're co-host. Making lists of businesses based on which race their owners are as a way of fighting against racism. I don't even know where to begin, so I'm gonna just leave you with that.
You're not going to follow up on that, Big Boss fan? You don't have anything else to
No,
say?
no, I'm leaving it to you, but we do have a couple of hands raised, and I think Antoine he can't raise his hand, but I think they were even first. So we have.
Well, I got plenty to say on this, but let me just say a few things related to that, because I published an essay on this topic. America, a racist nation? Question mark. You guys could read it at capitalismmagazine.com, and I posted it on my Facebook page. Anyway, there's 2 points that I think are relevant, certainly in the United States, and that is, one, the racism amongst white Americans has dropped dramatically since I was a kid in the 1960s during the heyday of the civil rights movement. I mean, just it's declined so much that I think it's fair to say that white racism in America is dying. It's not dead yet. Derek Chauvin may or may not be a racist. I don't know. He's certainly guilty of police brutality. He might have done that to a white criminal too. That happens in the United States. But white racism has declined dramatically. The evidence for that is overwhelming. I mean, the rise of an educated, affluent black middle class, which would not be possible under the systemic racism that the leftists talk about, and that was certainly prevalent during the Jim Crow era in the South. The tens of millions of white voters supporting Obama, even in 2012, after what can generously be described as a mediocre first term in office, I mean, he still received 39% of the white vote in the United States, which is tens of millions of voters. The immigration patterns show very few black Americans relatively want to leave the country, and quite a few blacks from the Caribbean and Africa want to get into the country, not to mention the Latinos, or often people of color, to use the buzzword here, so many want to get into the country that some people who shall remain nameless want to build a wall, to keep them out. The polls show that 91% of white Americans either support interracial marriage or don't oppose it. Only 9% of white Americans oppose it, in contrast to 18% of black Americans who oppose it. The evidence supporting the conclusion that white racism has declined dramatically over the last 60 years is very, very, very strong, if not overwhelming. So I think that needs to be mentioned, needs to be discussed, but of course the left doesn't want to discuss that. They want to depict the United States as this country of systemic white racism, and blacks are not only held back by that, but their lives are threatened on a daily basis. And the second point I want to mention is about Black Lives Matter. Well, if Black Lives Matter, it stands to reason that we should be talking about the major threat to Black lives. And 90% of Black murder victims in the United States are killed by Black criminals. 10% by whites, Asians, Latinos, and so forth. 90% by Black criminals. And there is the real danger. What Talib Starks, a Black dude from Philadelphia who works with these kids, wrote a really good book on this, brutally honest. Black Lives Matter, LIES, Black Lives Matter. It's harrowing because he goes through so many of these murders. He calls the thugs, the gangbangers, the drug dealers, he calls them urban terrorists. And this is overwhelmingly the danger to innocent Black men, women, or children in the United States. I mean, some of these examples, and he has the actual newspaper clippings, photocopied in the book. Gangbanger goes up on the porch of a house, a rival gangbanger shoots his 2-year-old daughter in the head to make the father watch her die, which she does, to inflict suffering on the father. These kind of cases that the leftist media, this is just a few years ago, leftist media doesn't talk about them. Black Lives Matter doesn't talk about them. As Talib Starks points out, an accurate name of that organization should be Black Lives Matter, if and only if they're killed by a white guy. And even if it's in self-defense, that doesn't matter. That's George Zimmerman who killed Trayvon Martin in self-defense. And so it's a completely racist organization. All that matters is the skin color of the victim and the skin color of the killer. Self-defense doesn't matter. Justice doesn't matter. Black lives don't matter. And I conclude the essay with various policy recommendations, because this is a Holocaust. It is a Holocaust of Black murders in the United States. It's like 4,500 per year on average, 4,500 to 5,000 young Black men killed by urban terrorists every year. What does that average out to? 12, 13, 14 a day? In contrast, there's a handful of blacks who are killed by the cops in a year. So I mean, uh, this is the breathtaking dishonesty of the left. I mean, they just it's completely dishonest, and it's uh, Black Lives Matter. Then let's discuss how to protect blacks from the real danger, which is the urban terrorists. And I made several policy recommendations. One, legalize drugs. Disenfranchise these drug dealing gangs the way the repeal of prohibition disenfranchised Al Capone and those bootlegging thugs back in the 1930s. That's one thing we could do. Two, there are organizations, Jim Brown, the great former football player, who comes with a certain baggage of his own. He's got a number of violent criminal allegations in his past. But a heroic deed from the great Jim Brown, great football player, was go into the urban neighborhoods in LA and working with the Crips and the Bloods and try and bring about, peace between these warring gangs and show these kids that there's a better way of life for them. They go to school, they get a real job, not be the average life expectancy for an urban drug dealer in the United States is 20.5, 20 years, 6 months, and the cause of death is homicide. Show these kids that there's a better way of life for them. That's a harrowing undertaking. It's courageous because it's life-threatening, but support the organizations who do that to actually work with the gangs. Great athletes, like LeBron James, for example, has a lot of credibility in the hood if he wants to do this. And I can't even ask him to do it because he'd be putting his life on the line. It's dangerous, and he's got kids. It's got to be something. It's got to be your calling. It's got to be so meaningful to you that you're willing to risk your life to venture into the projects, and work with these gangs. Remember, some of these kids are 17, 18 years old. They've already killed 3 or 4 human beings, in their lives. They're killers. So you're putting your life on the line. It's very courageous, but it could be helpful. And another thing, the American public schools are a shambles. It'll take years to fix that. But one policy recommendation I made right away is, one, use phonics to teach reading. Jettison all the versions of the whole word method, they're failures. Use phonics. Start at 5 years old in kindergarten, not at 6 years old in first grade. Teach these kids how to read using really heroic stories. You can read Peter Pan, The Secret Garden, Anne of Green Gables, or some books that show black heroes or black kids as heroes who overcome, terrible obstacles to reach great achievements. But teach these kids to read at 5 years old. Show them there's a lot of really fun stuff in books. Motivate them to read, and teach these kids that their minds are strong, their minds are powerful. Our intelligence, this is the real superpower. And you'll get fewer of these kids rejecting education as these gangbangers do. Education's for the white man, education's for Asians, it's not for the black man. The black man's supposed to be gangster. It's just horrible. You get fewer of these kids reject education, more of them embrace education and embrace the mind. And as my buddy Aaron Briley said, black American philosopher, said, we can cultivate a black renaissance. That's what's necessary. If we care about black lives as we should, that's what we should be talking about. We can reform the police department. Maybe the cops need it. Some do. Most of them don't. I don't think. It's a hell of a job policing these high crime neighborhoods. I don't envy them. But maybe we can reform the police departments. Maybe keep working at white racism. It's still alive or it's dying. But if we really care about black lives, we have to go into the hood and address these problems that afflict the black urban community. I saw Candace Owens. I know Razzie and I disagree on Candace Owens. To me, she's a heroine. But I saw Candace Owens recently quoting Shelby Steele, the brilliant black American writer, when he said, "We are the only ethnic group in the country that celebrates our criminals." There's this gangster subculture. This is the real danger to black lives. This has to be addressed. And the left, of course, won't do it. They're dishonest. All they want to do is destroy capitalism, destroy America, attack Western civilization, attack the white man. They're beyond racists and socialists. They're nihilists. I mean, they want to burn it down. They won't do it. Whether people on the right, that is supporters of individualism and capitalism, we're the only ones who could do it. And that stands to reason. the only cure for racism is colorblind individualism. The left, collectivists to the bone, they hate individualism. They can't possibly come up with a panacea for racism. We're the only ones who can. And we need to, this is good, Razi. We need to generate conversation, reach out to people all over the world, and make people realize racism is a worldwide problem. It's been around forever. Extermination of the Jews, the Armenian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, endless sectarian violence in the Indian subcontinent. The beat goes on. Colorblind individualism is the answer. So only the individualists have an answer. We have to raise our voices on this, loud and proud. Sorry, I was gonna keep it brief, but I couldn't.
Well, my blood was boiling enough before you mentioned Candace Owens, but I'm gonna save that to the debate between us about Candace Owens, and I'm gonna go. I know the in-person group that is meeting here at the Ayn Rand Center UK World Headquarters, as we call it, has something positive to add. So yeah, you should be able to unmute now.
So I wanted to actually bring up examples of to focus on examples of heroes and not villains. There's three people that come to mind that I've been listening to who have talked sense and who are not from, I would say they're not from my sort of political sort of end of the spectrum. So Glenn Lowry, a professor in a university in America. John McWhorter is another one. And then finally, Sam Harris, who I listened to his podcast, which addresses this issue today, and it's absolutely brilliant. And so the first two are black, and Sam Harris is not. So there is something a bit even more heroic about Sam Harris, I would say, because in this current climate, it's all like I know friends, white friends, who think it's absolute suicide to bring up to oppose anything, to voice any criticism of anything that's happening right now. And for someone like Sam Harris to actually be rational and call for looking at the facts, that for me, that makes him a hero.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I have very strong disagreements with Sam Harris generally. In fact, I loathe the guy, but I haven't read what he specifically has to say on racism or on the insanity in the country today. But he may, Eamon obviously has, so he may well be, heroic in this instance. It certainly could be. I don't want to comment on some. I don't read Sam Harris. I can't stand the guy. But I applaud him. John McWhorter, I've read some Black American writers. He's very good. Like Shelby Steele, he's very good. He speaks the truth fearlessly about the criminal subculture that just torments much of Black American culture, and at least what I call this Holocaust. This Holocaust of Black murder victims. And by the way, I think it's even more courageous for Black intellectuals to stand up against the leftist propaganda and the leftist establishment, because if you're white and you speak the truth on this issue, they'll just call you a racist. But if you're Black and you say, I don't even say the stuff publicly that you'll be called by the left. It used to be Uncle Tom. That's passe. They got a lot worse epithets now for apostates, because on the leftist mentality, if you're Black, then you're supposed to be a leftist. You're supposed to support socialism and want to destroy capitalism, and it's supposed to be de rigueur, for Blacks, at least in the United States, to it's like to be self-evident that America is a pandemically racist nation. So for Black conservatives or Black supporters of capitalism, whether it's Shelby Steele or John McWhorter or Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams, or whoever it is. It takes tremendous courage and tremendous independence to stand up against the leftist establishment like that, knowing the kind of the way that you will be, the opprobrium that will be heaped on your head for speaking the truth. It's just appalling. I mean, it just makes you proud to be a human being, doesn't it? I mean, this is what they do very often, the people who speak the truth. And even if they were wrong, which they aren't, because they have a lot of evidence to support their conclusions, but even if they were mistaken, it's a contrarian viewpoint. Even if it's mistaken, it should be welcomed, because it helps us challenge the orthodoxy and question it, and maybe see truths that we otherwise wouldn't have seen. Same thing on the climate change issue, which is the same kind of where the left expects the same kind of lockstep conformity, and anybody who disagrees is called a climate change denier, and a deliberate attempt to link you to the Holocaust. That's what really enrages me, is the pandemic mendacity on the left. I mean, it's just dishonesty, but this time it's just in their DNA. And it's very hard to find any honest commentators in the political left, although I think probably there's still some.
All right, John has his hand up. John, you're unmuted.
Evening. Good to see some familiar faces. It's been a while. I'll hopefully we can get something positive out of this question, but I was wondering, we're living in a bizarre situation, and when people look back, I think they're going to find their own heroes of this, which might not necessarily fit in with our understanding of what is heroic. So to give an example, in the UK, which I'm hoping Andy knows some, has some knowledge about the NHS and the way it's become almost like the new religion in the UK. I mean, as an institution, it's pretty disastrous, I think, and has done a lot of damage to this country. But that doesn't take away from the hard work of the doctors and nurses, those working in the medical professions and medical science, that have actually saved lives and potentially driven innovation throughout this period, which might actually benefit us as a whole. I just wondered, how do we get people to focus on these individuals who have actually done something positive using their own minds throughout this, and move away from some of these collective ideals that focus very much on what government and government institutions are doing, or people calling for more intervention of them, and make sure that they're not necessarily made the heroes when we come out of this.
So the question is about what we can do to glorify the doctors and the nurses and all the medical care professionals who are saving lives, and in fact risking their lives in dealing with the virus.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, that's a good point. I know in the New York area, given the population density, in New York City, it's you can see why it became a hotbed, for the transmission of the virus. And the call went out for doctors, medical care professionals from all over to come into New York City. And there were people who were podiatrists, OBGYNs, people who have medical degrees, but they're specialists they're not in infectious diseases. But many of them answered the call. They answered the bell. The doctors, the nurses came into New York City, working in the hospitals, with these stricken patients, risking their own lives because it's obviously a highly infectious disease, and it's dangerous, especially for the elderly. And these are real heroes, and they're it's often done anonymously. So I don't know, or even if the medical professionals would welcome it, but how we could get their names individually and then cite them on social media or whatever as the heroes they are. Very often, people who are heroes are pretty modest about it. They don't even necessarily welcome, don't regard themselves as heroes, and don't necessarily welcome the publicity. But I think we could certainly, as a group. And I'm driving around near where I live in the New York suburbs. I see signs posted, regularly. Some of them are scrawled by hand, some of them more professionally done. Thank you, medical. It makes me cry, because it's a tribute. It's a heartfelt tribute. Thank you, medical professionals for the work you do, and implicit in that is risking your life, in the in the work you do to save innocent human life. So certainly, I think we could do that. A shout out like this to the medical professionals in general, which is done, relatively anonymously, and wouldn't embarrass people who may not want their names cited as examples of heroes.
John, if you have a follow-up, you're still on.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, gratitude. Ellen Kenner just has a piece in this issue of the Objective Standard on gratitude, and gratitude is a powerful force. We could certainly feel it in our own emotional life, understand it in our own heads, talk about it within our own circles, post it on social media in general terms. The sincere, heartfelt gratitude that we experience for these medical professionals who risk their lives to treat patients, and the death count has been high in various places around the world. How much higher would it be if we didn't have these dedicated healthcare professionals willing to risk their lives to treat their patients, or patients total strangers to them. It's gratitude is certainly, John, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's something that we should experience very strongly and communicate it privately or publicly in any way possible, and probably do it anonymously, because like I said, unless you have explicit permission from a various doctor or nurse to mention his or her name, I would do it anonymously. But gratitude is a powerful force. I remember Leonard Peikoff once, was talking about charity once, in an election. He was, one of the things he said about charity, if you perform charitable acts for innocent people, not for dishonest ones, or criminals, and it's not a sacrifice on your part, it's done out of generosity, and it's but he said one of the criteria, he said, for charity being legitimate is if the recipient says thank you. I mean, right? If the recipient says thank you, if the recipient is sincerely grateful for the largesse that you bestow on them. And I think this isn't charity that the doctors or nurses are doing, but it's succor, right? There's aiding, it's succor of innocent people who were stricken with this terrible ailment. And I think we should all say a heartfelt thank you, to these people, these medical people who risk their lives to apply their expertise to save human life. And I want to say it publicly right now. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next question or comment comes from Glenn.
Yeah, hi everyone. My question was really about predicting the future of the Black Lives Matter movement. So how will it evolve over the next 3 to 6 months, maybe a year or so? And I suppose I'm wondering whether it will stay in what I would call the private sphere. So it will take the form of just trying to encourage people who are racist to stop being racist, and it'll sort of effectively be a sort of just a public campaign, a public pressure to be more aware of those things, or whether it will inevitably be taken up by the state and enter the public sphere. And so regulations, laws, other things like that will emerge. And knowing the left as we do, they tend to see the world as a zero-sum game. So I wonder whether they think that in order to raise up Black lives, they will have to somehow lower down or diminish or reduce freedom for other people. And I just kind of wondering what your view is as to where this is all going to head out and play out.
Well, that's a good question, and of course, anybody who thinks they can predict what's coming in the future is delusional. That is a fool's game. But nevertheless, we could speculate, and certainly, there's a leftist movement. I don't know. Maybe in part they're trying to encourage white racists to be less racist, but they're such racists themselves. Namely, like I said before, the only Black lives they care about in the United States are those who were killed by white people, regardless of whether it's in self-defense. And enormous preponderance that killed by blacks, criminals, aggressive murderers, they don't mention. So I don't know how much they actually care about Black Lives. They're actually a racist organization. But you're right. The trend line from the push, the goal has always been more and more state control over the life of the individual. I mean, the philosophic impetus here is Marxism, and you can see it very clearly. I mean, on a Marxist worldview, going all the way back to the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels in 1848, the worldview dismisses the idea that society is composed of autonomous individuals, and sees society as composed on, made up of warring economic classes, right? It's a collectivist mentality. There are these groups, these economic classes, the rich and the poor, the owning class and the working class, the oppressor and the oppressed, and that's still that's the mindset to this day. Like I said, in the United States, there's a ton of evidence to show that white racism has dwindled dramatically over the last 60 years since the heyday of the civil rights movement, and yet that hasn't budged the Marxists off their worldview by one scintilla. I mean, this is a communist worldview. There's the oppressor and the oppressed. It has to be. And, you know what this is methodologically, epistemologically, and how human beings use their mind. This is a case of rationalism on steroids. Ayn Rand defined rationalism as deduction without reference to reality. So, beautiful. So we start with the principle that, whites are oppressors and blacks are the oppressed. Certainly that was true in the past. Do we bother to look at reality in any serious way to see the change? No. You have the white oppressor and the black oppressed. And notice, by the way, something that's really scary here is that the Marxists in the U.S. have added to their class war mentality, the rich versus the poor. Marxists were not racist. That's the National Socialist left, right? It's the National Socialist version of socialism. The Marxists were fighting class war, not race war. But notice that they've added a National Socialist element. Now it's not a race war element. Now it's not just the oppressor versus the oppressed, but it's the rich oppressing, victimizing the poor. It's the rich whites who are victimizing the poor non-whites or the poor blacks. They've reversed the favored and disfavored races, but this is still a race war element. This is still a National Socialist element. But notice the rationalism here. We start with that principle. That the rich white guys are oppressing the poor blacks, and we don't consider the evidence, the actual observation-based evidence that refutes that, and then we just churn out our conclusions. So if that's the case, then there has to be all of this oppression of blacks and by whites, and so we focus on whatever instances there may be. George Floyd instance is horrifying. Certainly an example of police brutality. May or may not be racist. Chauvin may have done that to a white criminal too. I mean, cops in the United States have been are guilty of that. But anyway, it has to be interpreted in that way. Even if Chauvin had done this to white guys in the past, it would still be interpreted as motivated by racism, because the principle that we start out with requires it. So you have a great deal of rationalism at work here, methodologically, and it's a militant rationalism. You bring up the empirical data to show that white racism has dwindled dramatically, and there's still a few leftists who will reason with you, but most of them are going to yell and scream and call you names and verbally abuse you. They don't want. They're clinging to this principle on emotional grounds, not on evidential grounds. And if you give evidence that clashes with it, it's going to trigger them. So I think, as a guess, I'm just guessing, we're speculating. Yeah, I think we're going to see the leftists push more and more and more for this to be government agencies, the Black Lives Matter agency to police this, and to impose more and more governmental restrictions, where even if you just say something in passing that may sound vaguely racist, you could be slapped with a fine or an infraction. a legal. I think we're going to see the leftist push for governmental agencies to regulate and police this. I couldn't predict with how much success, but certainly, yeah. That's the left's worldview. It's going to be more and more. Take any pretext you can. What was it? Saul Alinsky said, never let a crisis go to waste. Any pretext you can to push for more and more government control over the lives of the individual, more and more statism and socialism, and more destruction of individual rights and capitalism. So yeah, I think your instinct is a good one. I do think that's the trend line. That's the direction we're moving in, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it might be important for us to actually front up this issue and address racism as a private sphere issue, and try to diffuse the whole egalitarian undercurrent that will inevitably, and the statist reaction and agenda which will come from the left. Yeah, I think it's important for conservatives to stand up. Conservative, I mean, there's not many objectivists in the world, but there's a lot of conservatives in the world, and it's important for the conservatives to tackle this issue and keep it as a purely just, racist question, rather than let it spread out to a more general egalitarian type point of view.
Yeah, well, no, I think you're right, Glenn. I think the best amongst the conservatives still have some respect for individualism and individual rights. It's tied to their religious views, right? Because the soul is, a personal attribute. It's attribute of an individual. It's not a collective entity, and so that gives the individual certain dignity. So it's tied to their faith-based beliefs, but there is a certain respect for individualism and individual rights amongst the conservatives. Once in a while, I'll hear the conservatives even mention the term individual rights, where I almost never hear that from leftists. And so, yes, you're right. They need to speak up, and we anybody who's semi-rational and cares about human lives, we need to speak up that colorblind individualism is the panacea here. It's the only cure for atrocities of racism, whether it's the Armenian genocide or the Holocaust, or the Rwandan genocide, or the Jim Crow era in the U.S. South, or whatever it is. It's the only cure for the endless racism that has tormented human history, and of course, it's also individualism in another form is also the cure for communism and the atrocities, the class war atrocities that they perpetrate. So we never let a crisis go to waste. This is it's an opportunity for us to speak out on individualism and colorblindness, specifically regarding as the cure for racism.
Well, when you guys find those conservatives who are willing to stand up for individual rights, please let me know who they are, and please don't say Candace Owens. Lee, you're next. Sorry, Andy.
Somebody I strongly disliked, of course, was William Buckley. But some of his writers, he's gone now. But some of his writers at National Review are better. Certainly, they're much better on this issue than you'll find on the left.
Lee.
So how about Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, for example, the people on the right that do stand up for individualism sometimes.
Yeah,
there are others. A lot of them are black, by the way. A lot of the ones that remain are black writers. But anyway, I wanted to make 2 points. One related to that quickly. By the way, Andy and I used to play. Hi, Andy. Used to play one-on-one basketball in Westchester, and he sometimes gave me a pretty good game. But anyway, a quick trivial point. The people I express my gratitude to frequently are the food supply workers, people at the Kroger grocery store. As I tell them, you are more important to me than health workers. I'm not sick, but I sure am hungry. So I try to.
We're Americans, yeah, so we live to eat, right?
We got to eat. So, okay, the other thing is this is related to what we were just talking about, that I was glad to hear Andy going after the left strongly and forcefully here, because I hear too much from objectivists nowadays of making left and right either trying to destroy the distinction or say they're more or less equivalent. They're just as bad. And so it's the left that's killing us. And you just have to look at the history of America in the last 100 years. It's a slow progression, a ratcheting progression towards further leftism. And you know, some of us have been around more years than others and can remember when they weren't nearly as strong, when religion was actually pretty strong. It's not strong now. It was strong in the 50s and until the 60s. The thing that's killing us now is the left. And I think we're headed towards, first towards 1984, and then after that towards Anthem, neither of which are religious. Those are leftist results. So anyway, I'm glad to hear Andy talking about the evils of the left and not making it equivalent, not making an equivalency. Sure,
Right.
the right is full of cowards and people that don't know anything, but there's still a lot of people on the right, and Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams are good examples, that are basically decent people, intelligent people that have some understanding of the issues and are still fighting. And if we have any chance at all, somebody mentioned that there aren't many objectivists in the world. There aren't. If we have any chances at all, it's with at least the right will buy us time. So I once put on a website, posted, I know some people won't like this, but I posted, "Only Jesus can save America." And by that, I don't literally mean as the Jesus is God, or, you know, there's no God, but if we don't find some way of finding common cause with those kinds of people, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. So I'll stop. I could go on that for a while, but I'll stop right there.
Andy, I just have a quick point before you answer. Because I was talking to Glenn earlier, and I mentioned to him how a few years ago, objectivist cartoonist Bosch Foston referred to Republicans as socialists, and I think that applies that applies to conservatives here as well. So,
Well, you haven't read Thomas Sowell.
Sorry?
You haven't read Thomas Sowell then, because it doesn't apply to Thomas Sowell.
Well, Thomas Sowell isn't
Walter Williams.
but they're not leading the Republican Party.
What's her name? Ayaan
Hirsi Ali. But
Hirsi Ali, or any number of other people I could, mention. It doesn't apply.
By the way, guys, Bob Stubblefield points out Clarence Thomas is one of those conservatives who stands up for individual rights. But I get
another black guy.
Right, a heroic black American. Remember when the hoopla 30 years ago when Big Bush appointed him to the court? There was some leftist publication, I forget which one it was, had a picture of him on their front cover of their magazine, of him as a lawn jockey. Clarence Thomas as a lawn jockey, holding that land and saying, Clarence Thomas, lawn jockey. All right. And it was just despicable. But anyhow, I agree with you, Dr. Pearson. The left is vastly more dangerous than the religious right to freedom in the Western world, United States, or anywhere else. I'll go you one better. I think religion, even at its worst, is not as dangerous as collectivism. And I'm going to write a book on this, on the nature of evil. And the religionists are only the second worst evil, and the collectivists are vastly worse. And if we just look at the effects, the stack of body argument, 100 million murdered conservatively by the communists, 20 million conservatively by the National Socialists. The religionists don't do it. They give you a chance to convert your religion before they kill you. Whereas the Nazis, if you're born in the inferior race, you can't convert. The communists, if you're born into the bourgeoisie, you can't convert. They just wipe you out. It's a determinist philosophy, whereas the religion has respect for free will, which is a form of respect for the mind. And I don't agree with the argument. Even the Muslims, never mind the Christians, that even the Muslims, they give you a chance to convert. And I don't agree with the argument that if the Christians 1,000 years ago, or the Muslims today, or at any point in their jihadist history, had the technology of the Nazis or the communists, they would have murdered tens of millions or hundreds of millions. The only thing that stopped them was lack of technology. I don't agree. For instance, Matthew White's book, beautifully named Atrocities. Now there's something that's appealing. I want to read the book titled Atrocities. Now, in fact, I have. And he's using state-of-the-art historical research. And Genghis Khan and the Mongol invaders, the best guesstimate from historians is 40 million deaths. using swords, mostly as weapons of mass destruction. So it wasn't, if they murdered 40 million people with swords, and I think it was Tamerlane who, when he emptied the conquered city of Baghdad, he had like 80 or 90,000 civilians outside the city. He had his soldiers chop off all the heads and then build pyramids of skulls, of 80 or 90,000 skulls. I mean, the horror of this is just unbelievable. But swords as weapons of mass destruction. So I don't buy that argument that it was a lack of technology. I think more importantly, one is respect for the soul, especially in Christianity, which is an individualized personal attribute. Consequently, the individual has dignity that the collectivists do not grant to an individual. And two, the free will element, that you can save your soul by choosing to convert, that the Nazis or communists don't give you that choice. And I think religion is evil without a doubt. I think its legacy is that it has made irrationality respectable. Because if you can believe that there's this super ghost of the universe who created the entire universe out of nothing, then, I mean, by contrast to that, what's it to believe that the aliens have landed at Roswell, New Mexico, and the US government covered it up for 70 years? So religion has made irrationality respectable, but there's certain offsetting factors here that make them, they're tremendously evil, but there's certain offsetting factors that make them less evil than the left, who will murder millions, and as Leonard Peikoff might say, not turn a hair at it. So I agree with you. I don't know if I would go so far as to say only Jesus could save America, but I think the religious conservatives are much more our allies here in the battle against the left. And some of the conservatives aren't that religious anyway. I mean, how religious is Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams? I don't see much religion in their writings.
Well, I hope we never find out what the jihadists would do if they had the technology, because some of them are working on it. I think they would use it. But all right, let's go to Bob.
3 quick points, 2 on the current digression and then 1 back to the major subject. I don't know if you remember playing basketball with me also, Andy?
I do, Bob, I do.
Okay. Second digression, with the evil of the leftists versus the conservatives, think about the area under the curve. The leftists can kill a lot in a pretty short time, but the rightists, they can do it over a very long period of time, and it's not the same sort of death. It's a long, slow death. So I'm not sure the vote is as easy to cast as you two believe. Third point.
You're from Arkansas, Bob, so I can see why you have certain reservations about the religionists, right? You grew up in Arkansas, didn't you?
I grew up in Arkansas, yeah. I'm not sure what the relevance of that is.
Well, the Baptists, the Southern Baptists, the religious fanatics, they tend to be strong in that part. At least they tend to be strong in that part of the country, right?
Yeah, it never got to me personally. But,
I'm glad they banned the teaching of evolution in various states like Tennessee, and So, but
if I continue a digression, I could talk about Christian Science, which is the religion of my mother.
Oh, really? No medical intervention for the sick?
That's right. That's right.
That's pretty bad. I mean, I get some faith healing kind of stuff. That's pretty irrational.
Very Platonic religion, but let's skip that digression for right now. I wanted to get back to heroes. Have you ever heard of William Smith, the father of, I guess it's pronounced stratigraphy? It has to do with geology. And so he was I guess, early 19th century hero who developed, he was a son of a blacksmith, and therefore the Geological Society of London, of course, England, of course, thought he was lowlife and not worth anything. But he was really a hero in the field. I just happened to have been watching a great courses on that covered this before this show, so that's why he's on my mind right now. So anyway, there are many great heroes of the Enlightenment era that are.
The Lunar Society of Birmingham, who's little known in the United States today, but the Lunar Society was filled with great scientists and technologists who were, including Joseph Priestley for a while, who were real heroes.
Well, one of the themes or ideas that Ayn Rand has talked about is the extent to which heroes are not recognized until after, they're tortured until later, and then their heroism is recognized. And William Smith was a little bit in that way. Although Wikipedia claims he was finally recognized, but in the meantime, he had spent a lot of time in debtor's prison because he was financially unable to meet his requirements because he was not recognized.
It's a good thing the American founders did away with that, or else, Nikola Tesla might have spent some time in debtor's prison. I think when he left the Waldorf after living there for years, he owed them like thousands of dollars, which was a lot of money, back then. But Tesla was able to escape that fate, fortunately.
Yeah. Anyway, so those are my 3 points.
I mentioned, I hear you, Bob, about there's so many heroes. That's why John Hersey and I, doing the hero show starting on Friday, we'll never run out of examples. We'll never run out of examples. There's so many, and the human race, that whatever advances we've made in any field, including liberty, is because of these heroes who have carried us forward. And why I wanted to mention before, apropos of SpaceX and landing human on Mars and living on Mars, I want to mention the great Carl Sagan, the great astronomer who died so young. But the Martians will be us, and I think history will bear out Dr. Sagan's prediction. So yeah, you're right, Bob. There's so many heroes, so little time, right, to honor, to appropriately honor them.
I'm just waiting for somebody to to keep it positive, because otherwise I will go back to the villains.
I tried.
Bob's right. There's millions of heroes that we could discuss, but the parameters you stipulated were like in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Where the villains unfortunately seem to predominate.
But John had his hand up, so John.
I was again trying to keep it positive. It might be verging into the realms of psychology, but I hope Andy gives some insight. Obviously, heroes are a great inspiration and allow you to look on and think how you might want to live your life. But as you were saying earlier, a lot of heroes are quite modest, and it's some people through a hero complex perhaps just want to be recognised for something that actually isn't particularly good. So I wonder if you've got any advice as to when looking on these heroes and looking at how they can inspire your life, you do it in a positive manner and not just in some sort of search for recognition for the unearned.
So let me see if I understand the question. We're talking about certain mixed cases of people where in part they're seeking the unearned, but maybe in part they perform certain legitimately heroic deeds. Was that?
Yeah, on a personal level, if you're looking on at heroes and you take some inspiration from them, you don't fall into the trap of yourself just looking for recognition, but can take some positives from their actions and make a positive impact upon your life.
Right. Yeah, well, I think very often, real heroes don't regard themselves as heroes and not looking for, acclaim or publicity. They're just pursuing their values, and their values are, life affirming, life supporting values, and they'll seek to achieve those values indefatigably. They won't be denied. They're indomitable. The great Ernest Shackleton, one of my heroes. So, by the way, the rest of his life was often tainted, but he's a towering hero in the field of Antarctic exploration. Above all, it may be, along with Apollo 13, these may be the 2 greatest survival stories of human history. And Shackleton, once said, obstacles are just things to be overcome. So, I mean, then we can learn that, and heroes do it repeatedly. That's why I love, in my book on heroes, one of my favorite heroes is George Washington Carver, the obstacles he overcame just to get an education. This is back in the days when racism really was, prevalent in the United States. Just to, even if he had never achieved the advances in agricultural science that Carver did at Tuskegee Institute, the way he battled to get an education and finally overcame every obstacle imaginable, racism, poverty, everything you can imagine to get an education would make him a hero. So we see these true stories and we realize, wow, this is the human potential. This is what we could do, and I could be motivated to do this, to be indefatigable and indomitable in pursuit of my values. I'm not looking for recognition. I'm not Peter Keating. I'm not looking for prestige or social acclaim or anything. I want to achieve these values in my life and do a lot of good for myself and in doing good for myself, I could also do a great deal of good for innocent other people as well. So I think heroes, these kind of hero stories, can motivate us and inspire us to do that. It's not about prestige here; it's about value achievement and living a flourishing life, as Aristotle put it, gaining new diamond here, and also your self-fulfillment will be very beneficial to other people within your purview. So it's a win-win situation. So it's about value achievement. It's not about it's not about social acclaim.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. And like Dr. Stubblefield said before, there's a lot of heroes in history, and we can look at their stories, and one, venerate them for the practical achievements that benefit human life, and two, be inspired by them to be the best version of ourselves. Those are the two, great contributions that heroes make to human life.
So before we go back to Lee and Joseph, I have received an anonymous tip about a hero from the past few weeks. Retired police captain David Dorn, who was shot protecting his friend's shop, was it?
Was that the 77-year-old black sheriff who was murdered? And that was yeah. Right, good example. Yeah, good example.
Yeah, the sad thing, at least for me, is I had to Google the name, because when I turn on the news, that's not what I hear. I hear that people are peacefully protesting against some sort of systemic racism
and we shoot retired black cops in the head while we're doing it.
Yeah. Lee.
So Andy, you're mentioning Shackleton. Reminded me, although Shackleton indeed was a great hero, I would say a greater hero was Amundsen, who made it to the South Pole. And he's a hero because he was extremely rational and planned extremely carefully in a reality-oriented way how to get there, whereas Scott, who was worse than Shackleton, was a much better Englishman than Scott. Scott was a second-hander and planned poorly, and Scott and his group froze to death, and Amundsen made it through without any trouble. They had no trouble at all, and that I think is truly heroic if they did that. And there is that famous book called The Last Place on Earth, or originally it was Scott Amundsen, and the author's name is escaped me for the moment, but Andy will know that author. Roland Huntford.
Roland Huntford, right? Yeah.
Roland Huntford, The Last Place on Earth. It's very good, an excellent contrast between Scott and Amundsen in terms of reality orientation, reason, planning, careful planning ahead of time, versus emotionalism, second-handism, so on. That's Scott. And that book was sold by one of the objectivist book services way back in ancient times. Anyway, it's a good book. And I just wanted to quickly comment on Bob Stubblefield's comment on that religion will kill us in the long run, which could be true. I don't know, but let's say it's true. We aren't going to make it to that long run if we don't oppose the left consistently now. We'll never get there. We'll never be able to get killed by them slowly when these leftists are killing us quickly with their nihilism. So I'll stop there.
You're right. Amundsen's a great hero, and you're right that David Dorn, right? Yeah, David Dorn, right? And you're certainly right that the leftists, they're not even socialists so much as they're nihilists, in a way that's, I think, much more evil than religion, which is not to whitewash the evils of religion. It's just that collectivism is even
right.
So, anyway, I mean, maybe Dr. Stubblefield wanted to respond to what Dr.
He
Pierce
might.
said.
He usually does.
It's like a medical convention here. We got Dr. Pearson, Stubblefield.
No, that would be too long.
Well, anyway, Razi's running the show, not me. So we'll leave it. I'll turn it over to Razi.
All right, yeah, and when Glenn mentioned, let's the conservatives need to stand up because there aren't many objectivists. Let's solve that problem rather than see who is not as bad as the other.
Yeah, that's a good policy recommendation, Razi. I'm with you.
Sure, let's do that. But how quickly can you do it? That's the problem.
I think 20 years.
Do that. That's what people thought 20 years ago. It's like fusion power. It's 10 years away all the time.
I'm focusing on a very small area, and I think we can do that here.
The melting of the land-based polar ice is always 10 years.
That's right. So.
But Razi, I'm with you, bro, and
yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
Yeah, to help you convert the UK into an objective, in a place where objectivism is thriving and flourishing and has a real cultural voice. Anything I could do, I'll help you. And maybe they'll even allow immigration from aging objectivists into the race war that I'm terrified is coming in the United States.
Well, we'd love to have you here, permanently. We fly you over whenever we can, which unfortunately we couldn't do in recent. By the way, Andy was scheduled to be in the UK on 2 separate occasions for a week each time in the last, I think, 3 months, right? But we can't blame the government for preventing that. Well, we can, but I don't think the events would have gone on as planned anyway.
Yeah, in the midst of a pandemic, it's an act of God, right? So here we can agree with Lee Pearson against Bob Stubblefield. God is malicious. God's dangerous.
Amen.
Joseph, few people know God as well as you do.
That's right. That's right. I didn't want to talk about God, though. I wanted to talk about a hero of mine. He actually, Paul Akers, I think he's in Washington State, I think, in America at least. And he is doing continuous improvement every single day. And it is just amazing. I watched many of his videos. They are really, really intoxicating when it comes to positive attitude, making your life better and stuff like that. He had an incident this week or previous week where he was stung by a bee. And because he got really good systems on everything, he was able to get his medication within a very short time. And he was just seconds away from death. And then after doing that, he is making a lot of systematic improvements and taking all kinds of precautions in order to make it possible for him to much more easily handle these problems in the future. And I think that is really the heroic attitude. It is about making your life the best it can be. And I think he is a very good demonstration of how you can make your life as good as it can be, even in these troubling times. So Paul Akers is a guy that I really, really suggest people look into. He's an amazing guy. That was my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Joseph. I think there are a bunch of heroes with us today. Although their deeds of daring do have not been the ones that have been dominant in the last few weeks that Raz is talking about. But I think whatever Jeff Bezos's flaws are, I think Amazon's an extraordinary company, and I think he's heroic, and I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs doing a lot of very creative work. I mentioned Elon Musk because SpaceX just launched within that window of the last few weeks, and like I said, this could be an epoch-making event and part of the beginnings of the privatization of SpaceX exploration. But there's a lot of entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos. course, Steve Jobs isn't with us anymore, but Jobs and Wozniak at Apple, that was a revolutionary company, and there's a lot of them. Wozniak is still around. Apple is certainly is still very active. There's a lot of entrepreneurs and companies that are doing great creative work. And we'll see what the biotech industry creates in the next 50 years or so. They might have revolutions in the field of medical care that we can't even see coming. Like in prior to Alan Turing, in World War II, and basically creating the first computer to crack the German Enigma code. I don't know if anybody was envisioning the computer age, and then the internet age. God knows what these heroes in the biotech field, harnessing the body's own, augmenting the body's own defenses to fight off cancer cells, and things like that, and they, and may be able to make cancer a thing of the past, or cancer as a killer very near to a thing of the past. And what a tremendous boost to the human life expectancy, and not just the life expectancy, but presumably the health. Because you don't want to grow old if you're decrepit, but if you're robustly healthy, and the cloning of vital organs too. And I think biotech could achieve that, cloning vital organs so that you can you have, and that cloned heart has your DNA, right? So you don't have to suppress the body's immune system to take the cloned kidney or liver or heart, which enables you to not only live longer but live robustly. And God knows what's coming. I don't know the names, in the biotech field, but I wouldn't be surprised if these kinds of advances, are made in the next 50 to 100 years. Really, I'll be gone, but my daughter's 17. She may well, she may well be able to benefit from this and have a life expectancy that. What's life expectancy for a girl born today in the United States is roughly 80, as compared to like 30, 35 maybe, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, roughly 250 years ago. Who knows? Penny's life expectancy may be 120 or whatever, or her children's life expectancy. My grandchild's life expectancy could be 120 or 150, and in good health. If the leftists don't kill you, that is, like Dr. Pearson said, you can be in great health. The leftists send you to a gulag or a extermination camp. Now that's all irrelevant, but the leftists can kill us in another way, and that is to nationalize these privately owned companies, and then they'll never make those advances in the first place. But anyhow, there is hope. There's all these great work being done, and if capitalism survives, and here we can quote somebody I also think was a hero from the past, and that's Julian Simon. His great book, The Ultimate Resource, about the ultimate resource is not iron ore or coal or oil or fertile lands. The ultimate resource is this. And the more human beings there are, the more minds, population growth is not a problem. The more human beings there are, the more human minds to work on problems. If capitalism survives, if individual rights survive, then we see these minds working on these problems, and I think we'll make tremendous advances. And I think there's going to be, Dr. Stubblefield pointed out before how many heroes there are in the past. I think capitalism survives. I think we'll see all these advances made by gazillions of heroes in the future.
Well, then let's make sure that it does. And on that positive note, unless anybody else has something positive to add, I think we actually kept it more positive than I thought it would be, because there's not much to be happy about when you read the news nowadays. There is no meetup this Saturday with Josh. We'll be back next Saturday. And Monday, there will be a meetup. I'll announce that soon. And next Wednesday, we will be discussing racism, and we will be also doing something that is really frowned upon, I think, nowadays, and we will be defining it, right? And Andy will be speaking. We might have another speaker. And I hope you'll all join us for that. And if you haven't yet watched our Facebook Live show that is on every weekday at 6 p.m. UK time, I strongly encourage you to watch it. On today's show, Nikos discussed the media coverage of the riots and protests with Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spike Magazine. It was a very good discussion, so I encourage everybody to watch that. And if you want to support the Ayn Rand Center, of course, we encourage you to sign up to the Ayn Rand Center membership, aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you next Monday.